Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. The simple truth was, whatever role her father had asked Quentyn to play would be beyond him. He'd have been better off sending Trystane, her younger brother was a boy still, and yet he outshone Quentyn both in wit and charm. Arianne believing in a year or so he'd outshine him with a spear also. So she had missed it and cursed herself for doing so. The letter from Ellaria scolding her for not listening to her and not making her feel much better either. Finding out later he was going to the Stormlands at least made her feel a little more at ease. Her brother could rarely match wits with anyone against Oberyn. It was as big a mismatch as if he'd faced him in the yard. Speaking to Daemon, it soon became clear what her father's plan was, and she laughed at the stupidity of it, only for Daemon to give her reason to pause. "Yatterwood, princess," Daemon said as they sat drinking some wine. "What of the blood royal?" she said dismissively. "Remember what you said of him? That he's Criston Cole reborn, he whispers in my brother's ear, that he should rule after my father. That it is not right for men to kneel to women, that Arianne especially is unfit to rule, being the willful wanton that she is," she said, the words rolling off her tongue easily as she had said them more than once. "Perhaps this is his chance to see it done," Daemon said, and she laughed only to see the serious look on his face. "You really think my father would replace me?" "I think your father wishes you to be a queen, not a princess. What moves would make it so?" She knew he had wished her and Jacaerys to be together, that her heart was Tyrion's and Jacaerys, Morgiare's, would have been an obstacle to that. Yet he had accepted Tyrion's offer, and she had assumed that to be the end of it. Was it not? Did he still see her as a queen and not princess of Dorne? She sipped on her wine and let her mind wander. Using the Dark Star to kill Morgiare would suggest he did, but that had been before he'd agreed to the match with Tyrion, hadn't it? Had she messed up and mistaken the timing in her head? She began to think about things even more. No, Ser Geralt had met with her father before he'd agreed to the match, before he had known the truth of Tyrion. Arianne breathed a sigh of relief. Here, worrying about a plot against her love had briefly clouded her mind, and left everything else unclear. Still, though, her mind wandered as she tried to see the moves her father was making. Quentyn, Yronwood, maybe others, could they wrest control of the army from Oberyn? If so, why, to what end? Dorne couldn't dare take on the might of the dragons, nor the army that Jae had at his back. Her father would never treat with the falcon and the stag, would he? She briefly shuddered as she thought of Robert's rage, the horror of it, something that disgusted her as much as the man himself did. Soon an even more horrible thought occurred to her, one which forced her to drain her glass and quickly refill it. Robert was unwed. His heirs were not his heirs any longer. Would her father see her wed to the man who'd laughed over her cousins' bodies, her aunts? Would Dorne allow him to? "Princess," Daemon asked worriedly when he saw her expression. "If my father wed me to Robert, how would Dorne react?" she asked, and saw Daemon laugh. "Please, Daemon, I need to know." "Your father would be dragged through the streets. Oberyn would probably do it himself." "Dorne would never accept it, princess," Daemon said. And Arianne nodded. He was right. They would not. Oberyn would not. Unless, no, Oberyn would see betrayal like this coming. Wouldn't he? Oberyn, does he trust Anders Yronwood? Of course not. They are perhaps on friendlier terms, but he'd never trust the man. Daemon said. She began to drum her fingers on the table. Daemon was right. Even if they managed to take her uncle out of the equation, something she had no doubt they'd fail at, it still didn't lead them anywhere near putting her on a throne. Her father would be better waiting until she and Tyrion were married. At least then they'd have a claim. If he wished his blood on the throne, all he'd have to do was wait. Perhaps one day Arianne and Tyrion's child may well be wed to the King of the Seven Kingdoms, she thought. A small smile on her face as she did so before she shook her head, trying to concentrate on the matter at hand. "How ready are we to take my father?" she asked. "We're ready. Give the word, princess, and it shall be done." Daemon said, and she nodded. Now wasn't the time. She needed to know more. The next few nights were restless. Her dreams were disturbed as her mind tried to fathom her father's plans. Robert was out. He simply wouldn't win. Dornish spears added to his own forces would be burned under a dragon's flames, and Dorne itself would burn if her father tried to go against Jay. The dragons were key. How to stop them would be her father's first objective. Shavasai, it was a game of Shavas, she realized as she sat up in her bed. She looked down to the empty space beside her, her lion's place, or was he a dragon now, she thought, with a warm smile, as she brushed her fingers over the sheet. Standing up, she walked to the window, the cool air feeling refreshing against her nude body. It allowed her to shake the last vestiges of sleep from her mind, and after arranging for a warm bath, she readied for the day. Sevuse. She needed the board, and she needed a player to play against. You have other pieces besides the Dragon Princess. Try moving them sometime, Daemon said mockingly as he beat her once again. How do you negate my dragon so easily? She asked. A dragon is strong, and most new to the game think that grants them victory. So they ignore the other pieces, but these, he picked up the rabble, and these, he picked up the spearmen. These can win as long as the king is not who you focus on killing at first. She looked down at the table as Daemon set it up once more. The game she played now was a much different one. The dragon fell quickly, the trebuchet and the catapult falling soon after. And when she was on the verge of winning, she saw it. We need to take my father now. Send a raven to Hellholt and make sure Ilaria and the children are safe. We need to make our move now before we have none left open to us, she said, as Daemon looked to her. Now, Daemon, she shouted. The knight ran from the room and Arianne looked down at the board. A king boxed in. Couldn't give orders, dragons or no. Spears at his back would pierce him, but the knife to his heart would be more literal. Her father didn't wish to kill Jay. He wished to have him do it himself. King's Landing, 2098 AC. Rosier. When news came from the Stormlands, he'd been stunned. He held no love for Stannis. He was his brother by blood and not choice. It hadn't always been that way. He knew he'd loved him once. But when Robert put him in charge of Storm's End, his brother had never forgiven him. Even though it was Robert who chose to slight him, Renly had been the one to face his scorn. But knowing he'd been beaten, was captured, and perhaps even dead. Rosley had found himself upset, and more than just at the loss of their men. While Robert marched with the Golden Company, Jon Arryn with the Knights of the Vale, Rosley felt it was not enough. The numbers didn't add up, and Robert was not the man he had once been. Nor was Jon Arryn, truth be told. The Lord Hand had left him with a problem, and one he'd moved too late to fix. Word coming to him of Lysa Tully and her son's imprisonment days after he took his place. The lady herself hadn't taken to the black cells well. Her death, though, was not something he felt any remorse for. Why she'd bitten through her tongue he dared not guess. It was the boy who troubled him. Gommon tried his best, but he'd been in the cells too long, and in the end they'd had no choice. The milk of the poppy ending his suffering and only reinforcing Riensley's own. My love, you seem troubled, Michael asked. Just thinking on Robert, he said softly as he walked back to the bed. I'm sure his grace will be victorious. Not my brother, Lysa Tully's boy, he said, shaking his head and readying to dress. It was not your fault, Rensley. You tried to save him. His death is not on your hands. Michael said, and Rensley nodded, welcoming the kiss he got and wishing he had time for more. We need to check our stores, just in case, he said, pushing Michael away. You're no fun. Michael pouted and Renzi kissed him hard, before whispering that they'd have fun later. He had confiscated the food in the city, Tyrell's stores being the first place he'd sent the gold cloaks to. That it would lead to problems was something he couldn't do anything about. They couldn't risk running out in a siege, and their own stocks were far lower than he had hoped. In hindsight, he'd not have done it. The resulting fights and near riots that had broken out, forcing him to divert more and more men to Flay Bottom. They'd lost a half-dozen gold cloaks and had killed more than 4 times that amount of people while trying to keep order. Even now there were places in the city that he knew men wearing the colors of the crown feared to tread. The city had to hold, though. The Red Keep had to hold, and it was his duty to hold it. It had become clear to him from early on that he wasn't cut out for this part of ruling. Something which had opened his eyes and changed his mind more times than he could count. You could be king, my love. Robert is king, but he has no heirs. Stannis. He had dismissed it at the time as just pillow talk, but with Stannis falling, be he dead or captured, and Robert outnumbered on the battlefield, he could very soon be the last of his house. The thought of that causing a shiver to run down his spine as he walked through the Red Keep. Robert had left Sir Preston with him, and the King's Guard kept close to him at all times. But the man's presence brought him no feeling of safety or allayed any of his fears. Should Robert fall, yes, he'd be king. But did he wish to be, and what good was a crown if you've no head to put it on? No. If Robert fell, he'd surrender the city. He'd not taken up arms against the dragon, and maybe he'd keep his lordship. After breaking his fast, he spoke to Uren Santagar, the Red Keep's master of arms, telling him they were in a strong position, should the worst come to pass. The rest of the day he spent listening to petitions, doing his best with limited supplies, and fewer men to see to the needs of those he could. Rensainli knew he could risk alienating the wretches in Flea Bottom far easier than he could the lords and knights of the realm. I'm so glad that's over. Michael said to him, and Rinsley couldn't agree more as they saw the final lord. He was just about to rise from the throne when the commotion at the door caught his eye. Magister, he said, seeing Illyrio and some of his men trying to come in, his guards stopping them until he bid them stand down. Lord Rinsley, we must speak in private. Illyrio said. The man's worried features made him fear the worst, little knowing just how bad the worst would be. He had him directed to the royal apartments. Illyrio and a young man wearing a silver mask, he, Michael, and Sir Preston all hurrying to get there, which given Illyrio's girth was a sight to see. Still, the man kept pace and out of breath. Though he was, when they got to sit, he didn't wait long to tell him the terrible truth. Robert was dead, their army beaten, and soon the lion and dragon would be on their door, literally in the second case. A dragon, he said, shocked. A dragon, he burned the Golden Company to dust. We'd barely made it away from him. Illyrio said while the boy just looked at them both, his silver hair catching his eye, though it was the thoughts of what to do next which filled his mind. We must offer terms, surrender, perhaps it's time for you to leave, Magister. If what you say is true, which I have no doubt it is, then perhaps you should be in Essos rather than here. Surrender. Leave. We will not. We'll fight until the last man, if need be. The boy said angrily. Who are you to tell me what to do? He asked. I am your king, the boy said, standing up. Agensit, Sir Preston, if you will, Illyrio said, and Rensley looked on in horror, as the king's guard smacked Michael hard in the back of the head, knocking him to the ground, before drawing his sword and placing it at Michael's neck.
Sir Preston, Magister?
He asked, his voice shocked and yet relieved when he saw Michael move. Think yourself lucky. I still need a stag, Lord Renly. You will do as I tell you, or I'll make you watch as your companion here suffers for your refusal. Is that understood? Illyrio asked, and Renly nodded. Good. Now bow to your king, the silver-haired boy said. Kin, I am Aegon Targaryen, the sixth of my name, king of the Andals, Rhaegar and First Men. Kneel before me, or I'll have Sir Preston remove one of your lover's eyes and make you eat it. The boy, Aegon said. Rensley looking to Michael with terror in his eyes. Your Grace, I am at your command, Rensley said as he took a knee. Good Lord Hand, tell the stag what it is we wish of him, the boy said with a smile. He listened on as Illyrio gave him orders, shut down the city, have the gold cloaks man the walls, ready the Red Keep for a siege, and send men to the docks to stop all ships from docking. Looking from Illyrio to Aegon to Michael, he knew he had no choice, and so he did. As they told him, and as he lay in the black cells that night, he only hoped that his love was safe and unharmed. He prayed they'd need him for longer, and that when it came, the dragon would burn them all. Old Town 2098 AC. Samwell. The Citadel had come back to some order after the deaths and disappearance of the Magisters. Sam had watched as men had been made Archmasters, though they weren't quite ready, as links had been formed a little sooner, and as moves had been made to make the place more secure. They had no true guards, but had hired men to act as them. One of them a man Sam had become friendly with. The man was older than most, slightly overweight, and Sam had found him to be funny, even if he spoke oddly. He'd been wary about who he befriended after what had happened with the man that Jon Snow and Marwyn had sent to him. No, not Jon Snow. Jack Sherry's Targaryen, according to the Ravens, the Citadel had received. To say that had thrown the Citadel into a furious state of whispers and arguments would be an understatement. Some Archmasters saying it was clearly a lie, that there was no proof of such a thing, and what evidence did the boy have. Others speaking of the things he'd been able to do and using that as proof enough that he was a dragon. Telling tales he'd listened to eagerly of about how the Targaryen blood was magical and how it explained it all. Whether that was true or not, Sam knew Jon Snow had magic in his blood. He'd seen it firsthand after all. Isn't that what warging was? As for the boy himself, At first, he'd feared Jon Snow. It had obviously been him behind the deaths and disappearances, and given what he could do, Sam knew he couldn't hide. But then the letter had arrived, and while it hadn't cleared up everything, it had given a reason for it. One he knew now to be ever more true. "A letter from a friend, young Sam," the young woman said. "I have no friends other than here," he replied. "Yet a letter has arrived all the same." He opened it and read through it quickly. The words not clear, but yet he understood them all the same. "Sam, no doubt you have misgivings about a role you played. While I cannot remove them, allow me to try and alleviate them and any concern you may have about whether your role puts you at risk. Life is about choice, Sam, and some people make terrible choices. Choices that others have to pay for and which may cause them pain. The choices certain men made caused my family and me great pain, more than you can ever imagine. So my choice was clear, and I live with it, knowing it was the right one. One day you may find out the truth about why I made that choice. I hope if you do that you understand. Until that day, I wish you all the best. Sam, study hard, and be what you wish to be, and do so free of any fear. For you have no need to fear me, making the same choice with you." He had read the letter and wasn't surprised it wasn't signed. Some things were better left that way, he felt. When he found out the truth about Jon, he had begun to wonder if the family he spoke of was the Targaryens and not the Starks, as he had imagined at first. Over time he had come to believe that, to be the truth, little comments he'd hear whispered in the library at night, further proof of that. Just as well Theobald didn't live to see the dragons return. Villain used to rant about them when he was in his cups. As did Gallard. He began to wonder just what they had done to anger the dragon so. How little he knew of what truly went on here. Still a surprise to him, after his almost 4 years of being here. Sam had gone from novice to acolyte, had forged a half-dozen links already, and to some was considered a prodigy. While some treated him how he'd been treated for most of his life, people like Leo Tyrell, though that had perhaps been because they had known each other before he got here. Others like Pate, Armin, Molindar, and Runin had become his friends. A few nights later, Sam made his way to the Quill and Tankard to meet up with his friends. No doubt he had to listen to Pate speak on Rosie, though he knew the others would prefer to speak on dragons. For the novices and acolytes, the truth about Jon Snow had led to many discussions on whether or not he was the only hidden dragon, and would they soon see them over the skies once more, Sam smiling at the thought. He hurried down the winds and alleys, finally making it to the tavern, laughing when he saw them already drinking as he walked inside. Here he is now. Sam will tell the truth of things. Molinder said, hushing the others. "Aye, Sam will call you a liar to your face, Leo," P-Bate said while Rune and Armin laughed. "I will," he asked. "Hey, tell him, Sam. You've met Jaime Targaryen. Tell him he's not silver-haired and purple-eyed like Leo claims he is." Potate said, "Aye, I've met him. He's dark-haired and gray-eyed," he said, taking his seat. "When have you met him, fat boy?" Leo said. "I met him here in Old Town when he came for Lady Lannister's wedding to Lord Mormont, and then again during the tourney at Highgarden. I traveled back here with his cousins, the Starks," he said, and watched as Leo gulped. "Pay up," Payday said, and Sam watched as Leo gave over some coins before he got up and walked from the table angrily. "The drinks are on me, lads," Payday said to loud laughs. He spent the night japing and jesting with his friends, the drinks flowing and all of them singing along with the rest of the tavern as the Hidden Dragon and the Greedy Falcon and the Rutting Stag were played. Sam feeling unsteady on his feet when they rose and began to sing along with the Mockingbird, who fooled the Falcon. While the others stayed for longer, Sam felt he had enough and made his way back to the Citadel, seeing his friend on duty as he arrived. "A man looks unsteady on his feet," Barlow said. "I may have..." Sam hiccuped. "Had too much to drink," he said, hiccuping once more. "A man will help you inside," Barlow said, and Sam leaned against him as they moved in through the halls and past the gates to their cells. Sam trying not to laugh at the idea of how much he'd dance on one here in this part of the living quarters. 4 years it had taken him to be given a cell beside the Masters and Archmasters, that he was a favorite of Ibros, perhaps being the real reason he'd been gifted one and not someone else. As Barlow's helped him through, he heard the man being questioned on what he was doing here, though given he was basically stopping Sam from falling over, it should have been clear, he thought as he chuckled. Before he knew it, he was been laid down on his bed. Barlow's moving his feet on the mattress, and Sam feeling grateful for the help as he wasn't sure he'd have been able to manage it himself. "A man should rest," Barlow said. "Thank you, my friend." Valor Morghulis, Vieldo Hieris, he said as he drifted off to sleep. Highgarden 2098 AC. Alana. War was a terribly dull thing, especially how Mace fought it, she thought as she sighed at yet another feast. Garland had set up patrols, drills. He had a cavalry force ready to ride out at the first call from Jack. Meanwhile, Mace held court, feasted, spoke of great victories, and the faith his future Goodson had placed in him. She swore if she heard the Battle of Ashford being spoken of once more, she'd go as mad as Daenerys had been. Olenna had done her best to keep Margaery and Sansa busy. She and Allery had spoken over and over to her granddaughter about plans for when she was queen. Sansa had helped the seamstress add designs to Margaery's wedding dress when needed. The thing was a work of art, and Olenna had to wipe a tear from her eye every time she thought of it. The idea of Margaery wearing that dress and standing beside Jae as they married in the Sept of Baelor was one which she could barely believe was so close to being true. Garland had spoken to her of Jaime's plans, while she understood the basics of war. She was no expert, and her grandson had reassured her of their soundness. Willis had spoken of the politics of the situation, and this was a ground she was far more comfortable covering. Robert and Jon Arryn had backed themselves into a corner, so much so that her grandson couldn't see where anything other than a complete military victory would end up with them, still in power. Something that she briefly worried could happen when she heard about the Golden Company, though Jae had assured Margaery that it was no issue, and she felt if anyone would feel the dragon's flames, it would be Bittersteel's men. She made her excuses and headed to her room. Mace was about to launch into yet another story of beating Robert, and she could feel the headache come on immediately. "Grandmother, are you well?" her sweet Rose asked her after she ran after her, the white wolf keeping pace precisely by her side. "I am Sweetling, just tired. I'll see you on the morrow," she said, kissing her on the cheek. And looking down at the silent wolf, words were not needed as the wolf understood her well enough. That Jae had left Ghost with them was something that comforted her. She'd prefer Kingsguard, of course, but the White Wolf was perhaps more dangerous than even Sir Arthur. He never left her side either, the wolf always seeming to be awake when she was. Olenna not even sure if the fierce thing ever slept. As she lay down, she hoped to soon hear some news. The not knowing was something that bothered her more than anything. She was woken that night by howling and in her worried state didn't even bother to properly dress. The dressing gown she threw over her shift, all she wore as she raced to the door. "What's happened, Margaery? Has something happened to my granddaughter?" she asked. Luftu shook his head. "Eric has gone to her room, my lady." "Do you wish to go see her?" Left asked, and she nodded. When they got to Margaery's room, they found Sansa, Willis, Garland, Mace, and Allery, all there too. Margaery, though, was unharmed, and she breathed a huge, relieved sigh before immediately worrying that something had happened to Jae. "Is it Jae? Has something happened?" she asked. "No, I think my brother is unhurt. It's something else. A warning. He wants us to be wary." "I think," Sansa said, and Olenna looked to Margaery, who seemed not to be upset. "How do you know?" Mace asked, and for once it was the right question her son had come up with. When Fang howled, I warged into her. It was strange. I don't know, but I felt one thing more than anything. Sansa said, "Danger to the pack." Margaery answered, for her, and Sansa nodded. Mace blustered while Garland did not, immediately walking from the hallway. They were in, and she smiled to see him take control, glad he was here and not fighting elsewhere. When Mace and Ailey left for their bed, she watched on as Sansa spoke to Margaery, and then as Willis escorted the girl to her room. Olenna walking into her granddaughters with her. "You're not worried about Jae?" she asked. Worried her granddaughter may be holding it in. "No, look, grandmother," she said, walking over to Ghost. "Ghost is Gerhurt?" she asked, and Olenna almost fell to the ground when the wolf shook its head. Oh, I give up. I'm going back to bed," she said. Tonight was not the night to figure out how her granddaughter could speak to wolves now. "He's safe, grandmother, trust me," Margaery said and hugged her, Olenna hugging her back before she walked from the room. "Right, stay here with her," she said, and her giant guard nodded as she and Left walked back to her room. It took them 2 days to find out what it was that they were being warned about. A Dornish army was marching through the Reach. Garland's scouts had said that they'd passed Horn Hill, making it clear where their destination was. Naik smiled like the fool he was, though truth be told he didn't have the full details. Yet, even had he, she felt the reaction would be the same. "This is good news. Dorne is allied with our king," mates said. Yet they marched to us and not to the king, Willa said. Obviously his grace sent them to us. Her son said, and she sighed once more. Why would he father? No, this is something else, and when they get here we'll be ready for them. I'll have the men form up. The defense is manned, Garland said, rising. I'm the lord here, son. I'll see to the men. Mates said, and Garland put his hand into his pocket to take the letter out. Olenna shaking her head. Allow Garland to see to the details, Mass. You need to be rested and ready should a battle commence, she said, and saw him nod. Garland giving her a relieved look as he left the room. Why would Dorne attack his grandmother, Willa said as they walked down the hall a little later. Dorne wishes to see his daughter on the throne. Willis, it's not us he seeks to attack. It's Marguerite, she said. What but? King's Landing, that was Doran, he asked, and she nodded. I'll see her guards are trebled. She needs to keep indoors, her and Sansa, he said, hurrying off. Olenna felt furious with herself. She'd allowed her mind to be swayed. Logic dictated that Dorne wouldn't do anything until Joris was crowned, that they had time to deal with him once the war was done. Now she felt they should have done so before it, either through Jay or she should have sent someone after the Dornish prince herself. She only hoped that she'd live not to regret it. Highgarden 29-8 AC. Gerlin. His scouts told him that the Dornish army was just shy of 10,000 men. Half spears and half horse. His own force was a little less than 20,000, not including those his father had, which would have brought it to 40,000. But unlike his own, his father's men weren't ready to fight. Most weren't even here. While Garland had assembled his men, his father had called the lords and he'd put them on standby. So rather than a true force of 40,000, he had a little over 25,000. What he didn't know was the mettle of the Dornish army. He believed the men he had gathered would hold, but if the men against them were the best that Dorne had to offer, he couldn't be certain they would. Something which concerned him almost as much as the ground he'd be forced to do battle on. Were he to choose a field to face an enemy on, this would not be it. The ground was both too close to his home and not best suited for large charges and for heavy horses. On foot, the Dornish spears would beat their infantry. If he couldn't use his cavalry as he wished, then he could end up losing this battle. Given where they were, he wasn't sure he would have time to rally if he did. As he looked out to see them in the distance, he readied for the parley, sighing when he heard his father ride up, and more when he looked to see the outfit he wore. We should go out and offer them terms, his father said. And Garland tried not to laugh as his helm snapped shut. I think it best if you stay here, father, he said, looking to Ser Jon Fossaway, who nodded. I must be the one to negotiate with these lords, son, his father blustered as he pulled the helm off his head, unable to keep the lid from shutting. Remember the young dragon, my lord, Lord Crane said, and his father paled. Garland, I'll be well, father. A knight isn't a lord, he said as he rode out to treat. He, Lord Crane, Lord Caswell, and Ser Jon Fossaway made up his party, the lords with his father, feeling the words spoken to him were enough to hold their own wishes to treat at bay for now. Looking at the sigils, he could see Manwoody, Vaith, Alaraon, and Sandagar. There were others back behind them, but it was these four who came to meet them halfway. My lords, what brings Dorne to our doors? He asked, looking to the four men across from him. Lord Daggus Manwoody, Lord Dacrin Vaith, Sir Seaman Santagar, and Ser Ryan Alrayan, large enough houses, but none he'd have been expected to launch an invasion onto their lands. There was silence for a few moments, and finally Lord Daggus spoke. We're willing to offer you terms, Ser Garland, favorable ones, Lord Dagos said. Why would we accept? Our men outnumber your own 2-1, and we can call on reinforcements, can you? Ser Jon said to them with a chuckle. We could burn the Reach, Serad, before or after we beat your army here, and many men will lose their lives, or you could give us what we wish, and we'll march back to Dorne. Saradir said, And what is it you wish? He asked. We ask for the ladies, Sansa, Olenna, Allery, and Marguerite to accompany us to Sonspear. They'll be treated fairly and their honor not besmirched on that. You have my oath as a Dornishman. Lord Daron said. It's true then. What they say, he said with a smirk. What? Ser Simon asked. That the Dornish sun makes a man lose his mind. You ask me to give up my grandmother, my mother, my sister, and our ward. Do you serve a different king, my lords? Do you really believe I'd agree? I'll make you an offer in return, turn around and ride back, and do so quickly. For now, you've just raised my annoyance. You're close to raising my ire, and I'm not even who you need to worry about. He said, his smile, now full. No, a voice asked. No, you threaten the future. Good family of a king, his future bride, and his sister. Dorne barely survived the dragon the last time it attacked them. Trust me, my lords. Good sirs, this time it won't, he said. A wolf in dragon's clothes is no true dragon, and we in Dorne have faced and beaten a real one before, Lord Vite said. You've been warned, my lords. In the name of King Jaehaerys, I order you to desist and march back to Dorne. Dorne follows no king, only our prince, Sir Seaman said. Very well, I'll see you soon without a flag of truce protecting. I wish you good fortune, my lords. You'll need it, he said, turning his horse and riding back fast. Once he got there, he spoke to his father, sending him back to tell his grandmother what was said. I need to be here, son, to lead, his father said. No, they're coming for Marguerite, father. You need to be there should I fall. Garland, son, his father said, his concern for his safety clear in his eyes, and Garland, despite not wishing him here on the field with him, couldn't help but respect him a little for that. Go ride, he said, and his father nodded. It was less than an hour later that he found himself riding out to face the Dornish cavalry. The lance in his hand was heavy, but it was not even close to the resolve in his heart. For King Jaehaerys and Queen Marguerite, he shouted as his lance hit home. King's Landing 2098 AC. Illyrio. Aegon was beginning to worry him. No, that was a lie. He'd been worrying him for some time. The boy had always been arrogant, but that was to be expected. He was a king, after all. Ever since the dragon had burned him, though, it had been much worse. His temper, his sense of entitlement, all of it threatening everything that Illyrio had worked for. After seeing him kill Jon Connington, he'd thanked his son for saving his life. The knife that had fallen from Jon's hand, clear evidence of what the man had intended. He'd have never hurt Acorn. Him, though, he'd perhaps have killed. Illyrio, though, was surprised when it became clear that Acorn hadn't even seen the knife. Instead, he killed the man for perceived disloyalty. While it was true that Jon was showing signs of it, it made Illyrio think more as they rode to the city. Signs weren't proof, and to so easily kill a man who'd acted as a father, he shuddered as they saw the city in the distance. Once they were in the city itself, he made his way to his building. The men in there were ones he needed to see before they set foot in the Red Keep. Aegon whined. The boy actually whined until Illyrio told Haldon to give him some of his concoction to calm the boy down. What he put in it, he had no idea, but it relaxed. Aegon, and he needed him, relaxed so he could do what needed to be done. He sat at his table, and Sorarat led the man in. The Unsullied's name was apt, considering what it was that he'd had him do. Pouring the wine, Illyrio looked at the old gray-haired man in front of him. A man who to look at you'd think no more dangerous than an old grandfather, and a man he knew was anything but. I'd not expected you back so soon, Magister, the tattered prince said, as he sipped his wine. Nor I, but needs must, my old friend. The men, they are ready, he asked. They are. We'll man the walls and gates. See you protected, but we can't beat back an army. My ships are ready to ferry us away. If all seems lost, then we leave. I know. Trust me, old friend. All is not lost yet. The man nodded, and they spoke some more. Illyrio, hearing the men had done as he asked, unarmed and unknown. They'd acted as mummers, merchants, and storemen. They were not, but they knew how to hide in plain sight. He'd bought the Windblown for very little gold. The price the tattered prince asked was far steeper, but what cared he for Pentos, when Westeros was to be theirs? After the tattered prince left, Sorarat walked back in, the Unsullied standing straight and to attention, and Illyrio once again admiring the man's discipline. He knew now that he'd made a mistake. It was these men he should have bought, and not the Golden Company. Varys had been wrong on that one. Still, his oldest friend's information was what would give him victory. It would see the dragon brought low and allow Aegon to sit his rightful throne. You found it all? He asked. This one found it all. It's as I told you? It is, Sorarat said. Good, you brought me some? The man nodded and handed him the jar. Illyrio smiling as he looked at it. They made their way to the Red Keep later that day. Really doing as he bid very quickly, and now with the man in the black cells, he could do nothing but wait. So he allowed Aegon to indulge. Walking with Septilimore, Haldon, Duck, and his own guards, they entered the throne room. Illyrio feeling the excitement as Aegon stepped up to the throne and took his seat. Your Grace, King's Landing is yours, he said as he knelt. Excellent work, my Lord Hand. How goes the rest of my realm? Aegon asked. It will take a little longer to see it brought to its knees, my king, but kneel before the true king they will, On that you have my word, he said, seeing Aegon smile. Sire, we're so close, and our son will be the greatest king of all. I'll see you soon, my love. Once Aegon is settled, I'll come to you. He thought as he looked to the Iron Throne and their boy sitting there. The God's Eye 2098 AC. Jaehaerys Targaryen, 1,000 eyes and one, the images filled his head. Jane unable to stop them from bombarding him. He saw Lozier as she took Jon Arryn's arm, Daeron as he sat in his chair, Oberyn feasting with lords and looking at them with distrust. In a dark gray cell, he saw a woman seek comfort from the cold, her dark hair covering her face, but her clothes letting him know she was a kraken. Then he was in the air, flying over an island, and below him he saw the gray wolf as it played with two young girls. Before he knew it, he was running along the ground, as an old man slept by the fire. His uncle's eyes were closed, and as he raised himself on his back feet, he turned his head up to get a better view. Aemon looked peaceful, content, his dreams giving him joy, if the smile on his face was any indicator. He continued on his journey, and was soon in a large hall, his other uncle laughing alone with men dressed in black. The forest was cool against his fur, and he moved closer to the large camp. Thousands of tents stretched as far as his eye could see, and he swore he could see a giant. He was in Casterly Rock, resting on a bed, the golden-haired girl asleep as he looked at her. He curled up beside her and felt content. He cawed loudly at other birds as he ate into the meat, the burned flesh soon filling his body. Taking to the sky, he looked down and saw the sheer amount of birds just like he that were feasting on the dead. Flying over the camp he saw her, Rhaenys looking to the bird and letting it fly by. The glass was faded, dirty, and the windowsill barely big enough for him to stand on. But he looked in to see the red-haired woman as she began to undress. The man behind her kissing her neck, and he cawed loudly and angrily at them both. Then he was there, and he saw her, and felt the warmth of her touch. The place he was in familiar to him, his old friend welcoming him gladly. He looked at her through Ghost's eyes, and saw her smile as she looked down on him, her words making the anger he felt recede just a little until the images came back and he was far away once more. The large man stood behind the chair, his axe ready to protect, and yet all he saw was the axe and the man it protected, and then the axe was in his hand and he looked down at it, only to find himself sitting up in his bed. How long? He said as he sat up, the clothes he wore not being the ones he'd put on. 3 days, Jaime said worriedly. I worried. I didn't mean to, he said, and Jaime nodded. What did you see? Many things. No, before your warge, what did you see? Jaime asked. I saw a knife, Marguerite. I saw. He closed his eyes and found Ghost, the wolf sleeping on the end of the bed, and just seeing her chest rise and fall brought him back to himself. Gee, I'm sorry I needed to know she was safe. I saw her die, Yaxley. A man held her on the balcony at Highgarden and cut her throat. I have to go there, he said, getting at the headache coming as soon as he did. Jaime handed him the water and Jay drank it down, looking up to see the worried look was still on his face. I'm well, Jaime. I know it's scary. Trust me. I know. It is what it is. No one can help me with this. I saw her die and I lost control. It wasn't me going mad or being like my grandfather, he said. I never thought that, God's jerk, did you? He felt Jaime grab him and hold him tight. The comforting feeling something he welcomed. I worry that you all, that I know what he did. I worry people see me, what I did. Out there on the field, what I do, I worry. No one thinks that, and if someone did, then they're a bloody fool. Look at me, Jay, Jaime said, letting him go. I was worried about you Jaehaerys Targaryen, Jon Snow, the boy I love, like he's my own son. I was worried that he was going through something that I couldn't help him with, that he was hurt and I couldn't comfort him. Not that he'd gone mad or that he's his grandfather's heir. You're nothing like him, Jay. Nothing. You understand me. He nodded and Jaime hugged him again, holding him before letting him go once more. I want to kill him, Jaime, Doran. I want to tear him apart limb from limb. I want to feed him to the dragons, burn him, kill him with my bare hands. Does that not make me a monster? He tried to kill the woman you love. He's the fucking monster, not you. Never you. Listen, Jay. Carefully, just listen. Catry said, and he nodded. This power of yours, it frightens me, not for the reason you think it, but because of what it does to you. No, not that, he said, looking into his eyes. It frightens me because it makes you doubt the goodness in yourself. If anyone else had this power, I'd be fucking terrified. On my oath, I'd be shitting myself. He found himself chuckling and was glad to see that Jaime chuckled with him. But you having it, I have no fear of it. Or you, I know you, Jay, your heart, your head. Jaime said, poking him in the forehead and making him smirk. I trust your judgment, Jay, you should too. They sat there for a few moments, and then Jay reached for his clothes, Jaime turning his back while he dressed. Thank you, he said, and found himself laughing when Jaime mussed his hair. Soon he met with all his Kingsguard and Jaime, along with the other lords in the main tent. Jesse, looking as some of them looked warily at him. Forgive me, my lords, riding a dragon in battle is far more taxing than I had expected. I had thought it just the same as a normal ride. It seems to be anything but, he said to some laughs. Your grace, your orders, Lord Tarley asked. My Lord Hand will take command of the army, Lord Tarley. You are to march to King's Landing with great haste. I intend to fly on ahead and meet you there. With any luck, Lord Rensley will surrender, and this war will be over. Lord Stark, Mathis Rowan asked, has won us a great victory, and Lord Arryn is his prisoner. We'll send riders to inform him to march to King's Landing also. My lords, we should send ravens to let the realm know of our own victory, he said, and dismissed them. Lord Valkyrin has arrived, your grace. He found no sign of the Magister and the Mummer. Sir Richard said, as soon as the other lords had left. Can you have your lips seek them out? I'd use the candles once more, but... Understandable, your grace. I'll see to it, say, Richard said. Doran, your grace? Arthur asked. He dies, be it by my hand or another's. His betrayal runs too deep. Sir Arthur, I believe he intends to take Margaery hostage to force me to kneel. But that won't be all. He wishes me dead, he said to gasps. How do you know this, your grace? Barristan asked. What you saw in the glass candles, I feel, sir, emotions, feelings, not quite thoughts, but enough to ascertain them. The magic required, the blood to look into the past, is far more than just using them in other ways. I don't know if it's my blood precisely, that's the key. If it's the fact I can warg, I can green see, but for me it's more, I felt my father and mother at Harrenhal. What they felt as if it was me feeling it, he said to disbelieving looks. He took a moment to reach out and pick up the mug, swallowing the water before he continued. My Lord Hand told me something. Something I didn't realize just how much I needed to know. I am not my grandfather, sirs. If any of you have even the slightest doubt I am, then I'll accept your cloak. I'd not ask you to serve me if you don't believe in me. I don't ask you not to question, not to raise objections, but I'll not accept doubt. I have enough of that myself. He looked at each of them and was relieved to see none of them raise any, none look as if they did, and then he held his breath, when Barristan spoke. I'll not deny what you can do is beyond me, your grace. Any doubt I have is on not understanding that and not on what I think about you. However, if you feel that is too much doubt, then I'll accept your decision. Barristan said, I do not, sire, that's just as much as I have myself, he said with a smirk. We travel for high garden, sires, all of us, Sire Barristan. Sire Walder, you're about to find out what it's like to fly on a dragon, he said as he walked from the tent. After bidding Jaime farewell and speaking to Rhaenys for a few moments, Jay smirked as Barristan nervously climbed up on Rhaenys' back. Arthur Loras, and unsurprisingly to him, Walder seeming far more comfortable. Within a heartbeat, they were in the sky. Jay say closing his eyes and seeing that Ghost was still laying by Margaery's side. The Battle of the Reach, 2098 AC. Carlin. The lance was discarded and his sword was in his hand, the blade cutting down through man after man before the horse was taken out from under him. Garland saw the spear, though, before it hit home, jumping and rolling rather than falling hard to the ground. He did lose his sword, however, and was forced to throw his knife before the man could get to him. As his would-be attacker fell down, Garland made it to the sword and was soon faced with another man. This one wielding a spear as he moved toward him. Moving back, he checked behind him to be sure he wasn't in danger of a back attack. And once he knew he was clear, he began to concentrate on the man in front of him. The first strike was easily blocked, and Garland waited for the second to come. When it did, he forced the spear to the ground and moved inside the man's guard. The elbow he brought down on the Dornishman's arm, causing him to drop the spear to the ground, and then spinning away, he brought his sword around in an arc, the man's head coming almost clean off his shoulders. Turning to look back, he saw cavalry riding toward him, and for a moment her felt relief, thinking them his. Only to look closer and see they bore Dornish sigils, and knowing then he was done for. He closed his eyes and pictured Lemonette, nodding as he opened them and readied his sword. Death was inevitable. The only thing you could do was face it and smile, which is what he did. The wave of heat hit him before he even saw the flames hit the horses. Then looking closer, he saw the flames had just blocked them off. When the dragon landed beside him and let out a roar, he heard weapons be dropped, the cheers soon going up when it roared once more. Garland made his way to the dragon and found some of his men doing likewise. "Your Grace, I thank you for the help. I did have it in hand, though," he said, and heard a snort from his brother behind the king. "Lord Jairus-Walder, make sure Sibert Garland accepts the Dornish surrender," the king said, and as his brother and the giant man carrying an axe joined him, he watched the dragon take off and head towards Highgarden. Lord Daeron Vive. The Reach cavalry burst through their ranks as if they weren't there. Daeron looking on in horror at the ease in which they did so. His own line held, but it would do them no good. If the Reachmen managed to reform, then their day was theirs. Ordering his own cavalry to form up, he led from the front and they moved out to the field. It was as he was deciding where to charge that he saw him and he couldn't believe his luck. "There we ride there," he shouted, and pointed to Garland Tyrell. "It's one man, my lord," his captain shouted back. "Is the fucking gallant. Let him feel, Dornish. Steel." The charge began slow, and by the time they reached full speed, he felt his excitement travel down to his nether regions. He was actually stiff. Blood war. It had always excited him, but he'd not felt the rush in many a year. As they rode, he was feeling it fully, and then he felt something completely different. It was like a summer's day enduring the warmth of the Reach, suddenly feeling as if it had been enveloped by an even warmer sun. Though when he looked, he soon realized that this wasn't a sun, this was fire, and fire burns. The wall of flame grew ever closer, and he tried to pull up his horse. Beside him, some men were lucky to do so. He was not, and as he felt the steel of his armor burn, he looked up to see a dragon fly over his head. It was the last thing he ever saw. Sir Jon Fossaway, he had broken bread with Dornishmen, crossed swords with them in tourneys. Jon had even shared drinks with the Red Viper himself. These were a different sort, a poorer sort, and he wondered had the true Dornish army ridden with Oberyn, and these were what was left. Or was this the real truth of Dorne, and they actually just weren't that good? Soon he found out he was wrong, as he came face to face with Sir-Dian's men. The first charge broke through, but the second floundered. He looked to see his men, Casewells, Cranes and Tyrells, break against a shield wall that didn't give ground. When his horse pulled up lame, he was no more than 20 feet from the shield wall, and he and those around him knew they were done for. Yet the fear was in the Dornishman's eyes, and he didn't know why. Sir Jon, look," Lord Lorraine said from beside him. "Lord Lornant," he said, reluctant to turn his head, and then he saw the wall of flames and heard the roar. He'd not seen it in the air, so he could only imagine what it looked like as it flew by. But seeing it on the ground was like nothing he could have ever believed. Had he not been here himself, and instead been told this tale later, he'd have sworn people lied when they spoke of its size. The only thing he could compare it to was one of those pinnacle ships the Lannisters used. It dwarfed everything around it, and when it roared, the earth beneath his feet shook. As he turned back to look at the shield wall in front of him, he tried his best not to laugh when the spears and shields hit the ground. He tried his best not to laugh as Sir Ryan walked towards him. The man's face anything but how it had been as Sir Jon rode to face him, the proud knight quickly taking a knee. "Sir Jon, I yield. I accept your yield, your surrender, you can make to the king. I do hope his dragon's not hungry, sir," he said, and he couldn't help but laugh at seeing some of the faces which looked back at him. Sansa, how they had gotten in, she had no idea. But around the keep there were fights going on. Guards fighting other men wearing the same armor. Wittles and Fang, along with their own guards, moved through the keep, Wittles holding her hand as his cane rattled along the ground. Where their destination was she didn't know, nor where Marguerite and the others were. It was Fang who had alerted them, the wolf growing at the men who'd met them in the garden. Sansa looking from the wolf to the men, and when Fang jumped at the one closest, Sansa knew they were not on their side. They had lost all but 2 of their guard in the ensuing fights as they headed through the keep. Now, as they saw the men in front of them, she wondered if they had enough men with them to fight them off. "We need to turn back," Willis said. "Where?" she asked. He didn't get to answer, as the 2 guards they had with them soon fell, leaving them faced with 3 men. As Fang attacked 2 of them, one of the men came towards them, his sword out and a smile on his face. Sansa took out the small knife she carried and saw the look the man gave her was almost dismissive. The look he gave Willis even more so. "You should limp away from here, cripple. We only want the girl. I've no quarrel with you." The man said, his accent heavy. "I beg to differ. You want her, you're going to have to kill me," Willis said. And while Sansa admired the sentiment, she didn't want to see him hurt. Willis, she said softly. The man moved, and just before he got to them, she heard rather than saw him fall to the floor. Her eyes had been on the sword in his hand, and not his face. She looked up to the long, thin blade that Willis pulled from the man's throat, and watched as he slid it back and twisted the top so it locked back into place in his cane. Sansa wanting more than anything to hug him right there and then, but she knew now wasn't the time. "Come, we need to move," Willis said, reaching out for her hand once more. And as she looked to see Fang finishing the last man ahead of them, she did as he bid. The room he brought her to was empty. The doors heavy, and she watched as he locked them behind them. Sansa giving in to her desire to hug him then, and feeling grateful for him when he held her for a very long time. Olenna, left and right were like a unit of men, more so than they were simply two. She watched on as they cut down men as if they were nothing, left backing right up, and neither man giving any quarter. No man was trusted unless they knew him personally, and even then they were sent on their way. How they'd infiltrated her guards, she didn't know, but other than the two men in front of her, she for now would trust no other men to protect her. They fought on and finally came to her granddaughter's room. Olenna horrified to find it empty and ransacked, though relieved to see there was no blood. Moving on, she found more and more dead guards, some hers, some men that had pretended to theirs. Turning a corner, they came across some of her guards fighting some others wearing the same armor. Whether her men were winning or losing, she'd not find out as left and right turned her around and brought her in a different direction. "We need to find my son and good daughter. Margaery must be with them," she said, and left shuffled her down the hall, unceremoniously. Normally no guard would dare lay hands on her, even accidentally, and the urge to let her thorns free was almost overwhelming. Left, though, was doing what was right, and Olenna was more than grateful for that right now. They reached more fighting, and she knew the room the fighting was outside of was one of their safest rooms. Directing left and right to help, she watched as they went about their business with ruthless efficiency. The fight, which had been even-handed, was now anything but. Her guards not just providing an edge, but completely turning the tables, and the men in front of them had no chance. When it was done, left was back by her side, right sending the other guards to both ends of the hall, having them take up position to let them know if more came their way. "My lady, Lord Mace is inside," Left said to her as Right knocked on the door. It took some time for it to be opened, and inside she found Mace, Allery, Leonette, and Jaina, but there was no sign of her granddaughter. Worried though she was, there was nothing she could do now except try to comfort Allery and Leonette, who were clearly distressed. Left and Right came into the room with her, both guards standing at the door in case they were needed, and before Olenna went to her good daughter and good granddaughter, she stopped and looked at them. Eric, thank you," she said. And as she moved towards her family, she heard the roar of the dragon outside, and she began to smile. "The king is here, and he's brought his dragon," she said to the women. Glad for the relief it brought to their faces and to her own heart. "Seashore Seaman Santigar." This was a fool's errand, though Mace Tyrell was a fool, so perhaps he shouldn't have expected anything less. Given the numbers the rest of the army faced, it was perhaps the only way they'd win this day. Still, Simon felt the stupidity of their actions was apparent when they had their parley. This was supposed to be easy, a stroll to the Reach, and when they got here, they'd face Mace Tyrell and some token force, not an army. Not a force that dwarfed their own, and not a force led by someone as capable as Sire Garland. He had bid them retreat, to take the offer and go back to Dorne. Whatever Dorne was thinking had been clearly wrong. They could not win here today, and to be bogged down in battle only gave the dragon the chance to come back, and come back. He would with them, threatening his betrothed and her family, another omission by Dorne. They had thought they were putting the Reach out of the equation. Yes, the king's sister was here, but she was just cover. They were her for the Tyrell and the wolf they'd have left here once they got her. It would have been bad enough to pull on the dragon's tail, without doing so to the wolves too. Unlike their own liege, the Starks had gone to war for the deaths of their family. "We can't find her, sire," one of his men said, and he sighed. The man they'd beaten and threatened had taken them to the Rose's room only to find she wasn't there. "Keep looking. We leave with her, or we don't leave," he said as they moved through the halls. By the time they did find her, he was down to 4 men and himself, and when he saw what she was with, he cursed the fact he had no crossbowmen with him. Not even an archer or a man who could fire a bow had he at his disposal, and as he looked at the Rose and the White Wolf, he felt it would not be easy to get by one to get to the other. Two of his men tried and proved him right, and as he watched the White Wolf tear out their throats easily, he felt true fear. Why didn't it make a damn sound? How could it move so fucking fast? Why were those red eyes staring at him in such a way? You can make this easy on yourself. Just come with us and the rest of your family will be safe, he said. And then he heard it, and the sound was unlike anything he'd ever imagined. I believe you should listen to your own words, sir. My husband has just arrived, and you've just seen what his wolf can do. Do you really wish to see what his dragon can? The Rose said, looking to him, a confident smirk on her face. He was almost paralyzed and had no clue what to do. The wolf snarled, and his men beside him didn't seem keen to move forward to face it. That it hadn't moved from the Rosie's side since it had taken down two of his men so easily was perhaps the only reason he or his men were still alive. When he saw the Rosie's smile appear and how full and beaming it was, he knew he was fucked, and as he turned around, he saw just how true that was. The king wore armor, the likes of which he had never seen before. The sword in his hand was a thing of beauty, its thin blade, flamed pommel, and flawless red ruby on its hilt, and the steel itself, easily identifying it as Dark Sister. Were the king there alone, then he'd have felt outmatched. Tales of his prowess were ones he'd heard from Oberyn himself. The two men on either side of him, though, were as legendary as the sword the king wielded. The bold and the sword of the morning stood ready at each shoulder. Sarder's own milky white blade in his hand as he looked at them. "Will you accept my surrender, your grace?" he asked hopefully. "My queen will," the king said firmly. "Your grace, I surrender," he said, dropping his sword to the ground and watching as Sir Arthur and the bold walked and stood over them. The king walked past them and left them there on the ground, not even looking at them. His helm was now in his hand as he wrapped his arms around his queen, and Simon, wondering if he'd lose his head, as Doran had surely lost his. High Garden, 2098 AC. Marguerite. Ghost had woken her from a nap and was dragging at her hand, pulling her with him, and she worried something had happened to JD, but the wolf made it clear that it had not. Instead, he wished for her to follow him, so she did as he bid. And very soon it became clear why. How they had gotten into the keep. She didn't know, nor who she could trust. That her own guards moved with her and that Ghost seemed comfortable with them was the only reason she was. They turned a corner and found themselves face to face with more of their men, her guards moving to them only for Ghost to snarl. She tried to call them back, but it didn't work, and she watched in horror as they were taken down by the others. The three men who'd done so then moved toward her. One of them smiling at her and filling her heart with dread, only for Ghost to move as swiftly as she'd ever seen him. She felt no concern or regret at the loss of the three men's lives. Ghost dispatching them as if they were nothing, only giving her relief. The wolf bid her follow, and she knew better than not to. On and on they moved, through hallways, ducking into rooms. Margasori wondering how Ghost seemed to know where was safe and where wasn't. Finally, it seemed her luck ran out. They were trapped, and ahead of them stood 5 men, where she got the strength from. She didn't know, only that she was a queen, Jaxley queen, and she'd not cower from men like these. When 2 men moved towards her, Ghost again moved quicker, the wolf taking them down and coming back to her side, and Marguerite looking down at him. Gratefully. James, he had left her the best Kingsguard he could, she thought, as she stood straighter and watched the men in front of her. When she heard the roar, she knew he'd arrived. And then before she knew it, she saw him. Sir Arthur and Sir Barristan were standing by his side, and the smile quickly came to her face. That he asked the man to surrender to her only made the smile bigger, and then before she knew it, she was in his arms. His lips on hers, and she felt as safe as she could have wished to be. "You came?" she asked. "For you, always," he said, and she felt the butterflies in her chest as he looked her over, almost as if he was checking to make sure there was not a mark on her body. The look in his eyes promising retribution to all of her attackers if there was. "I'm unharmed, Jackie, Ghost. He protected me," she said, and saw him rub the wolf's head. "Thank you, boy. Thank you for everything," Jack said, and though she wished to speak to him, she needed to know about her family, about the war, and about the battle outside her home. "Jax, is it over?" she asked. "Garland is accepting the surrender of the Dornish army. Loras and Walder are with him. Sansa is with Fang and Willis. They're unharmed. I can't be certain about the rest of your family, but Ghost will take us to them," he said, taking her hand. He nodded to Sir Arthur and Sir Barristan to move the prisoners, and they all followed Ghost down the hall. quickly stopping at a room where Ghost scratched at the door, and when it opened, she saw Willis and Sansa, each of them running to their respective sibling. She asked Willis if he was hurt, just to be certain he was not, and smiled when she heard Jaxa do the same to Sansa. "The battle is over, Ghost. Will take us to your family. Lord Willis, both you and Sansa should come with us," Jay said, leaving no room for argument. "Oh, of course, your grace, my brother. He is well," Willis asked. "Garland is unhurt, Lord Willis. He's with Loras and Sir Walder," she said, and Willis nodded, Marguerite taking it quickly when Jay offered her his hand once more. They began to move once again, Jay stopping when Ghost did, or when Thang growled and then nodding to Barristan. Marguerite watched as the Kingsguard moved with both wolves, the men in front of them soon taken care of and no longer a problem, allowing them to move on. "You may wish to close your eyes," he said to her, and Sansa, though both of them shook their heads. These men had attacked her home. As far as she was concerned, they deserved all they had gotten. When they made it to the hall where she assumed her family was, she saw men lined up against them, though the wolves didn't seem worried or concerned by these, and when she looked to Jaya, she saw he wasn't either. Even seeing the king didn't seem to be enough for them, and so she and Wellis stepped forward, the men then moving out of their way and allowing them to pass. Before she knew it, she was in her mother's arms, followed swiftly by her grandmother's. Her mother moving from her to Wellis, who, though he looked embarrassed, welcomed the embrace. As Jera told them about the events outside, she saw her grandmother relax and then stiffen. She wondered what that was about, but it was what Jess said next, which took her attention from it to him. "What do you mean you're going outside?" she said, anger and worry in her voice. "We need to find out who is on our side and who is not. Sir Barristan and Ghost will stay here. I'll take Fang with me, along with Sir Arthur, and as we move, we'll pick up more Leo men," Jer said. "You can't," she said, and saw both Sansa and surprisingly Sir Arthur agree. I need to know you're safe, that the threat is gone. I need to know it myself, Marjorie. Me, not someone else's word. I need to know," he said, looking at her, trying to get her to understand. She did, but she wasn't going to allow him to leave her and head into danger. "It's not safe, Jay. You're the king. You can't risk yourself so," she said, shaking her head. "I'll not, but I'll risk you even less. Trust me. If I sense anything that is more dangerous than what I've faced getting here, then Sir Arthur has my permission to knock me on my head and drag me back if need be," he said, and though it was an amusing image, it didn't comfort her. "Please, Jay, don't do this for me," she said, and he looked at her, her worry and upset finally getting through to him. "As my queen commands," he said softly as he took her in his arms. She knew if she looked up, she'd see the relieved looks on Sansa's and her grandmother's face. Both Sir Arthur and Sir Barristan nodded to her and took up positions in the room just in case they were needed. It was a couple of hours later when Garland, Loras, and Sir Walder arrived, Marguerite rushing to both her brothers to make sure they too hadn't been hurt. Jay sat in the corner and called Sir Barristan and Sir Walder over, speaking to them both softly, and then the two knights, Ghost and 3 of the men Garland had brought back with him, left the room. Ghost sniffing at the men before they did so. Where he'd sent them she could only guess, but given how he was now sitting with his eyes closed, she believed he was in the White Wolf alongside them. As Garland explained that he'd taken lords and knights into custody and his men were guarding the remainder of the Dornish army, Jussier finally stood up and walked over to them. Seemingly, whatever he'd gone to do was now done. They arranged for food to be brought, though she had no real appetite. And nor, it seemed, did many of the others. Garland and the King's Guard, along with some of the other guards, did eat, though. Marguerite envying their ability to do so. "How are you feeling, Marge? Truly?" Jaxed as she sat beside him, the plate of food in front of her untouched. "I was unafraid, Jay. I don't know why. Ghost was beside me, and I knew he'd not let me be harmed. But I was unafraid. The attack in King's Landing was different," she said. "I'm sorry, my love. I'm sorry I put you at risk. I'll make him pay, I swear it. I'll see him dead for this." Jax said, and she nodded. She knew he'd do exactly as he said. The resolve in his voice, the determination in his posture, the anger in his eyes, all telling her so. "Let's not speak of it until tomorrow. I just want to be with my husband," she said, and he reached out to take her hand and raise it to his lips, kissing it softly. "As I want to be with my wife." Highgarden 2098 AC. Jaehaerys Targaryen. His relief at making it on time was palpable, yet, as he walked with Marjorie to her room, that wasn't what he was reflecting upon. It was instead her calmness, her poise, how she had looked when faced with men trying to take her from him. Hearing her bring up the attack in King's Landing only further strengthened his resolve to see Doran pay, that she, because of that, was more able to handle this. While making him glad of it, didn't do much to make him hate Doran any less. Holding her hand and sitting with her as Garland told him about the prisoners they'd taken, looking through ghost eyes as he, Barristan and Walder rooted out any who had hidden, only proved even more just how strong she was, that more than even his relief was perhaps what was going through his mind as they reached her room, Arthur and Loras taking up position outside. When they walked into the room itself, Ghost sat down on the floor facing the door, and then she was in his arms kissing him. It was frenzied, rushed, as if she needed it like she needed air to breathe. Jaxie found himself needing it just as much, and when it finally began to grow softer and sweeter, he moved from her so he could look into her eyes. "My queen," he said softly, feeling yet not seeing her smile. "My king." She moved to the bed and lay down, Jax taking off his armor before joining her. Very quickly, he was just enjoying the feeling of Margaery's head on his chest and of having his arm wrapped around her. When he lay down beside her, his hand brushed through her hair and he felt her move even closer to him, wrapping herself up tightly against him as he held her and never wanted to let her go. He felt her give a little shiver, then heard a small little gasp and knew the emotion of the day was finally getting to her. Worried that she was finally going to realize just how much danger she had been in, he tried to distract her. "I don't think there's ever been a king as lucky as I," he said softly, and she raised her head to look into his face. "Why?" she asked. "My queen isn't just brave and strong, she's not just loving and caring or smart and beautiful," he said, seeing her blush a little. "She's fierce too, and not afraid to tell her king when he's being a fool." He chuckled when she did. Margaery looking at him with her lopsided grin on her face now. Whatever worries she had been close to giving in to, now forgotten, temporarily at least. "Perhaps my dear husband will try and not be so foolish in future," she asked, both jesting and serious at the same time. Jay looked at her as if he was deep in thought, staring at her just silently for a moment, and then when he knew she was on the verge of saying something, he shook his head. "No, there's no fun in that. Besides, I like when my wife puts me in my place. When she shows her thorns," he said, smiling. "Yea, dearest Targaryen, I do not have thorns," she said, pretending to be affronted. "Maybe it's time for your grandmother to abdicate." "My queen of thorns," he said, his smile bigger now, although soon it was to be knocked off his face, only to be replaced by loud laughing. For a man who had trained with the best swordsmen in the land, who sparred with Jaime and Arthur almost every day, you'd think he'd have been able to duck the pillow when it hit him in the head. Even failing the first one, surely he'd have ducked the second. Yet over and over again, she hit him with her pillow, her laughter ringing out and Ghost looking at them both before turning his head away from them, no doubt thinking they'd both gone mad. Jaichi squealed when he took the pillow from her and threatened to hit her back. Her squeals then only getting louder when he dropped it and grabbed her, his tickling forcing her to move from side to side, her legs kicking out as she tried to move away from him. "Gacy, please," she squealed as she laughed hard, tears falling from her eyes when he finally relented. He leaned on the bed and watched as she got her breath back, Margaery breathing deeply as she looked up at him, her smile ever present now. Moving down to her, he kissed her softly and rolled back over, his wife moving back to her position on his chest and taking his arm and wrapping it back around her. She then lay contently and holding his hand in hers as he brushed her hair with his free hand. "You should sleep," he said after a few moments. "I don't know if I can," she said, though there was no fear or worry in her voice. "I'll not go anywhere, Marge. I'll be right here." "I swear," he said, and she nodded. "I don't think I'm tired enough. I mean, I am. I just don't think I'm tired enough to sleep," she said. "How about a song?" he asked, and felt her nod, and so he began to sing. "Come, my love, I'll tell you a tale of a boy and girl and their love story, and how he loved her, oh, so much, and all the charms she did possess. Now this did happen once upon a time, when things were not so complex, and how he worshipped the ground she walked on. When he looked in her eyes, he became obsessed. My love is like a storybook story, but it's as real as the feelings I feel. My love is like a storybook story, but it's as real as the feelings I feel. It's as real as the feelings I feel. This love was stronger than the powers so dark a prince could have within his keeping, his spells to weave and steal a heart within her breast, but only sleeping. My love is like a storybook story, but it's as real as the feelings I feel. My love is like a storybook story, but it's as real as the feelings I feel. It's as real as the feelings I feel. He said, "Don't you know I love you? Oh, so much. And lay my heart at the foot of your dress." She said, "Don't you know that storybook loves always have a happy ending?" Then he swooped her up, just like in the books, and on his stallion they rode away. My love is like a storybook story, but it's as real as the feelings I feel. My love is like a storybook story, but it's as real as the feelings I feel. It's as real as the feelings I feel. He felt her shudder against him and heard the sniffles as she cried. Moving slowly to look at her, Jack could see, despite the tears, Marguerite was smiling broadly. "That's so beautiful, Jay. Did your father write it for your mother?" she asked, and he shook his head. "No, I wrote it for my wife," he said. And her tears fell heavier as she kissed him repeatedly. "Sleep, my love, please," he said after a few moments, and she nodded. "I love you, Jay," she said, and he kissed her forehead. "I love you too, Marguerite." While Marguerite slept, Jane did not. Instead, he closed his eyes and went to look for the doors. He needed to find out some things, and he had the rest of the night to do so. When he closed his eyes, though, something strange happened. It was as if he was in a large keep. There were doors everywhere, and as he opened them, he found himself already inside animals. Animals he'd not warged into, or had he? He was in a rat in King's Landing as it scurried across the floor. Seeing as Illyrio and the Mommer's dragon sat and ate in what he assumed were the royal apartments. Next, he was flying over Winterfell, the keep below him quiet in the darkness as men stood on guard at the walls. Over and over, he entered door after door. He was a gull on Dragonstone, he was Beleriand, a mule on a mountain pass in the Vale, and a horse in the Riverlands. 1,000 eyes in one was all he could think of as he finally shut them out and began to wonder what exactly he'd done. Feeling Marguerite as she snuggled tightly against him, he decided to forget about it. For now, he would have time to worry about that soon enough. For now, he had other things on his agenda, and so he moved against her and fell asleep. Morning, he felt her lips on his as she kissed him again, his eyes opening to look at her. "I could get used to being woken like this," he said, and heard her giggle. "Are you leaving today?" she asked, and he shook his head. "Tomorrow will do. I'd wish another night with my wife," he said, and then noticed she'd been up and dressed for some time. "Did you sneak from the room, or were your handmaidens in here?" he asked, looking at her. "They and grandmother, you slept through them all," she said, smirking. "Gods," he said, sitting up. "Your grandmother was most pleased to see you still dressed." Marguerite said cheekily. "Marguerite?" he said as her smile grew even larger. "As were my brothers." "Marguerite!" "And father and mother." "Marguerite," he said as she broke into laughter, only stopping when the knock came to the door and Sansa entered. Jaime got up from the bed and walked to his sister, hugging her tightly and asking her if she was well. "I am, Lord Wellis," and Fang made sure I was protected. Jay. "Then I am indebted to them both," he said, kissing her cheek, and ignoring her mistake with the name. It would take some getting used to, and in private it made no difference. He walked to the door to see Walder and Barristan were now on duty, and found that Loras and Arthur had gone to rest. Leaving his armor for now, he, Marguerite, and Sansa went to break their fasts. They were soon joined by Galen, Willis, and Mace, Olenna, and Allery. Nowhere to be seen. After eating, he asked them to join him and to find Olenna, Marguerite taking him to a large room to wait for them all. "Sir Barristan and Loras will be staying here when I leave, Marge? Ghost too?" he said as they waited for the others to arrive. "Jay, you're the king. You're in a war. They should be with you," she said, and he shook his head. "I have Rhaenys, Walder, and Arthur. If anything, this shows how much I need Kingsguards here with you and Sansa. As for the war, I'll explain about that when the others come, but it's much closer to the end than you all think." It took some time for the rest of them to arrive, Jay asking Sansa to stay also, which his little sister appreciated. Once they were all sitting down, he began to speak. It was time to tell them about what he had been up to, and how things had gone with their plans. "As you may already know, Oberyn beat the Stormlords, and he has taken Stannis prisoner," he said to Nods. "My uncles have also beaten the Knights of the Vale. Jon Arryn is currently in their custody." "Father is safe, Robb?" Sansa asked. "Are both unhurt, little sister?" he said, seeing her relieved sigh. "The Ironborn attempted to take the north while its men were in the south. They were not successful. Yaxlia and Bran are both safe. Sansa, he quickly added, before she worried. Theon Greyjoy and his sister Asha are both resting in our dungeons. Robert and the Golden Company, Margaery asked, and Jay took a breath waiting for the inevitable reactions. I challenged Robert to single combat, a surrender for a surrender. Jane said and heard the annoyed huffs, and then he felt Margaery's hand in his. As you can see, I won. Robert Baratheon is dead. He looked to each of them. Olenna looking happy, as was Mace Sansa, looking at him concernedly. But that was he had no doubt more about the risk he took than anything else. You killed him, Your Grace, Willis asked. I beat him, struck a mortal blow, but when he asked me to end him, I could not. Sir Arthur executed him in my name, he said, seeing some nods. Why not Your Grace? Mace asked. Cursed is the kinslayer, Lord Tyrell, and my family cannot afford to be cursed more than it already has been, he said to nods. So, the Golden Company surrendered, Olenna asked. No, my lady, it turns out they have a new king, a boy claiming to be my brother, Aegon, he said, his anger clear. But Aegon died, Allery said. Could he have? Is it possible? Willis asked. My brother is dead, my lord. Of that there is no doubt. This boy is nothing short of a mummer. He already tried to pass himself off as my brother to my aunt. I'd assumed her was still in his sauce. Something happened, though. Her dragons, perhaps, he mused. Your Grace? Wallace asked. What you're about to see, don't let it alarm you, he said, and asked for a candle to be brought. Putting his hand into the flame and feeling Margaery pull his other hand, and then even more frantically when he placed the flame under his chin. By the gods, Olenna said as Willis wrapped his arm around a clearly distressed Sansa. A dragon doesn't fear the flames, my lady. The boy claiming to be my brother is burned. Half his face, maybe more, I'm not sure, as he wears a mask. Rhaenys knows he's not Aegon. I know he's not Aegon. If he were, then I'd give up my throne to him, without thought, he said, and felt Margaery squeeze his hand once again, showing her support. Then how? Who? Olenna asked. Given who he was, backed up by I think that's obvious. Who do the Golden Company follow? He asked. Blackfires, Margaery said from beside him. So you now have to face a Blackfire and the Golden Company, Your Grace. Garland asked, Jay not sure if he was sounding eager for more battles or if he was simply stating the facts. The Golden Company is no more, he said simply. Jay? Margaery asked. After Robert's death, the leaders of the Golden Company refused to live up to his terms. They told me they served another king, and so a parley was called for. At the end of this parley, they tried to kill me, he said, feeling Margaery's hand squeeze his own tightly. How, Your Grace? Gorlin asked. An arrow. Thankfully, my armor was strong. Unfortunately for them, they woke the dragon, both the one in me and the one in Rhaenys. Claiming to be our brother was bad enough. To then try and kill me, Rhaenys and I would not let that go. So rather than the plan I believe my uncle carried out on Lygaron, the Golden Company instead faced a field of fire. Highgarden 2098 AC. Olenna. She listened as the king spoke of ending the Golden Company, of the devastation he had wrought upon them, and she smiled. A king needed to be ruthless and be willing to do terrible things. It should not be what he would normally do, but people needed to know that he would. Having dragons and not using them to strike a certain amount of fear made them pointless. Yaxley Hearus was a dragon, he needed to be a dragon, and that he was doing so filled her with a sense of ease. Given what had almost happened here, she needed it. She had barely slept the night before. Her worry that her inaction had almost brought about the ruin of her house, preying on her mind all night. Had the dragon not arrived when it did, then who knows how many of her family would be alive here this morning. Olenna tried to keep up with what was being said, but her mind kept going to Doran and wondering what the king would do to him. When I leave on the morrow, Sir Barristan and Sir Loras will stay here. From now on, Margaery will have a Kingsguard with her at all times. Sansa, I'd ask you stay close to Margaery too, so Sirs Barristan and Loras can watch over you also. Yakshiri said, and Olenna felt a huge amount of relief. Dorn, Your Grace? Galen asked. Oberyn and my cousins are with me. I'm not certain about Prince Trystane, but given his age, I doubt his father involved him in his plans. As for Prince Quentyn, he's with Oberyn right now, planning to stab me in the back. What do you intend to do about him, Your Grace? Willis asked. Quentyn will be allowed to take the black, Doran will die, the king said simply, and Olenna once again breathed a sigh of relief. Good. He has now twice tried to kill my granddaughter. I should have dealt with him the first time, she said, and saw the king glare at her. Out, all of you, Lady Olenna, you stay. Jacques said loudly. Jay? Margaery said from beside him. You too, Margaery, he said, his voice much softer now. She looked at her son and goddaughter, her grandsons, and Sansa nodding as she looked back to see the king, for that was what he was right now. Not Jay, not Jon, not even Jaehaerys. As she looked at him, she could see he was holding his temper in, and it actually frightened her a bit that he was able to, and at the thoughts of what he'd do once he let it go. Once everyone had gone from the room, the king stood up and began to pace. Margaery looking at him worriedly. When did you find out? He asked. I worked it out not long after the attack, she said, and Margaery looked to her shocked. And you kept it from me, he asked. We felt it best. We, he said, almost shouting. A few of the other ladies and I spoke of it. We felt it for the best if it waited until after the war. We never dreamed Iran would actually act before then. Did you not? It never occurred to you that the man who had tried to kill my wife would perhaps try again. We increased the guards, she said defensively. And a lot of good that did you, the king said. Who? Who? What? She asked, trying to bide her some time to think. Don't play games with me, not now. Trust me. My lady, I am in no mood for such, the king said, and once again she could see how hard he was working to keep his temper in. Myself, Lady Gina, Lady Ashara, Lady Daisy, and my good daughter. This was in King's Landing after the attack, he asked, and she nodded. Jay, I'm sure my grandmother only wished to protect you, Margaery said. Me? What about you? Your grandmother and the rest of those who knew are lucky you were unhurt, had you been... Olenna looked at him and didn't need to hear him finish. Tajai. No, Margaery. They held back information from me. Vital information. Had I known then, I could have predicted this. Predicted him. So no, don't defend her, or them, he said. And Margaery looked to her, and then him, and nodded. If you ever keep information from me again, my lady, even on the assumption that it protects me, if you for a moment keep it from me, then I'll forget I'm married to your granddaughter. Do I make myself clear? Your Grace, Do I make myself clear, Lady Olenna? The king said firmly. You do, Your Grace. I apologize for not telling you sooner. For now, I don't accept it, the king said, walking to the door, stopping and turning to look back at her and Margaery. For now, he said a little softer. Margaery glowered at her and then stood up and walked out, after her husband, and Olenna sat there alone. She couldn't fault anything he'd said, and if anything she welcomed it, that he cared so much about her granddaughter. Only proved once more how right he was. She would speak to the other ladies and let them know. No doubt they too would be on the end of an ear-bashing from the king. Olenna found herself sitting and wondering if this was what her son felt like after one from her. Dinner that night was far more pleasant than she had expected. The king's attitude to her and Allery seemed unaffected by the events earlier, which she was happy about. Lors came over to speak to her once it was done, telling her that he and Barristan would be taking over the duty rosters for her guards. That between them and Garland, they'd decide which ones stayed nearest to family. You are not upset to be left here, she asked, worried he would be, that he'd wish to take part in whatever battles were left. His Grace told me he trusted no one more to watch over his queen. He asked me not as a Kingsguard, but as his closest friend and good brother. Lorziard said proudly, I'm grateful you'll be here, you and Sir Barristan. It's an honor to have the Lord Commander guard the Queen. The King knows the message this sends, grandmother, Loras said. The next morning she watched as the King said his goodbyes, actually speaking to each of them before finally standing in front of her, Olenna looking at him nervously. I'll see it done, and then end this war, my lady. Soon we'll be ready for a wedding and moving into the Red Keep itself. I hope you'll be joining us more permanently. I would welcome your advice and counsel, he said, surprising her. I'd be more than happy to give it, Your Grace, she said, and was surprised when he hugged her before he moved to Sansa and then Margaery. The kiss they shared was anything but proper, and yet she'd not begrudged them. That morning, just like the morning before, she'd gone to Margaery's room to find he'd stayed the night, and just like the other time, he'd slept fully dressed. As she watched him, Sir Arthur and Sir Walder climb onto the dragon's back, she closed her eyes and said a small prayer. She prayed things would be brought to a speedy conclusion, that he had good fortune, and she asked the gods to keep him safe. Margaery walked over to her once they flew off, her granddaughter showing her own concern and upset. Olenna did her best to comfort her, but she knew she was a poor substitute for the man who'd just left. Looking to Sarabirstan and to Loras, she nodded as they turned to walk back into the keep. The two Kingsguard walked no more than a pace behind them, both of them with their hands on their swords, and Olenna welcomed the security they brought. "What do you think he'll do to Prince Doran?" "Margaery," she asked, though she was more than certain herself what that would be. "He'll bring him fire and blood, grandmother," Margaery said firmly, and Olenna felt a shudder run down her spine, wondering just exactly how far the king would go. The Riverlands 2098 AC. Littlefinger. Word came that the Northern Army had begun to march away. The Vale had fallen and Jon Arryn was now a prisoner. He'd even heard that Ned Stark now carried a Valyrian steel blade, and he cursed Lem for fighting rather than coming to him. Littlefinger was sitting in his solar. The books open in front of him as he added up the numbers. His coin in King's Landing was lost to him, his assets there either to be swallowed up by the new king or by his own workers. The account in the Iron Bank would make him comfortable, but in Essos he'd be to the Magisters little more than a pauper. The simple truth was that for all his schemes, his plans, plots he'd spent years working on, the end result was very little. It had taken coin to make his moves, and he'd spent a lot on the assumption that more would be forthcoming. Even when Illyria had come into his life and he had access to more, he'd used most of it to further his interests in the Vale. Running one long-term plot was costly. Two was damn expensive. Yet apart from the woman sleeping in his bed in the other room, he'd not in the end come close to the dream he'd had all his life. Now, if anything, that dream was turning into a nightmare. "My lord, your meal," the girl said, and he nodded, letting her put it on the table. "Is my wife still asleep?" he asked, and the girl nodded before moving quickly from the room, those who worked for him knowing better than to incur his displeasure. As he ate, he found he'd a little appetite, the food being eaten more for something to do rather than out of hunger. Two sisters. His life in the end had come down to the desires two sisters, inflamed. One who desired him more than anything in this world, and one he desired from the moment he saw her. He'd done his best to repel one and try to encourage the other, and yet his luck was out, and it had been the reverse for so many years. From his bed recovering from the injury the wild wolf had inflicted on him, he'd planned. When she came to him and he was at his worst, he planned. He'd see everyone who denied him, belittled him, or held him down. He'd see them all cower at his feet. Lysa was easy, her love for him unconditional, and as distasteful as it was for him, he had done what was needed to bring her on board. Kat was much harder, distance, her marriage to Ned Stark, her father, and what she was to him compared to what she could bring him required much more thought. Edmure was useless though, which was a boon, and through Kat he could perhaps gain the Riverlands. Maybe even the North, where Lysa only brought him the Vale. So he'd moved in the background, allowed Edmure to be even more useless, and it had only required a nudge here and there to leave the Riverlands ripe for the taking. Hoster was more of a problem, but a solution presented itself in the Maester and his lust being far more than his purse could afford. It wasn't supposed to be so soon, though, and for that, he blamed Ned Stark and his bastard. Their own moves, forcing Kat into the field much sooner than he had expected, and he couldn't take the chance he'd lose the opportunity. "Proud of you didn't wake me," Kat said, walking into his solar. "Forgive me, my love. You were so upset at the news, I felt you deserved some extra rest," he said. I did. I missed you, though. I had worried." "Kat, my sweetest cat, we are wed now, together forever," he said, getting up from his seat to kiss her softly. "Go break your fast, my love. I'll join you presently." "What are we to do, Pityer?" "Edmure Jon Arryn." "They were our final hope," she said, and he shook his head. "There's still the Golden Company, Kat, but the battle being over in the Riverlands gives us an opportunity. We must make haste and move on. In the confusion we can perhaps make it to Wickenden and then to the Drearfort," he said. "You're home?" she asked, wondering why he'd go there. I have some coin and some papers there. If things turn for the worst, then we'll head to Essos. My children, I'd not see them," she said worriedly. "For now, my love, we must see to our own heads before we can worry about anyone else's, especially should the bastard win," he said, seeing her cringe. "Would it not for the best if we're where he can't reach us?" "Aye," she said, and he kissed her and sent her to break her fast, finding some of the questions she'd ask him tiresome at times. He had to admit it was not what he'd expected, to be with her and have her for his own. Whether that was down to her age, that she'd borne children for another man, or simply that he gained nothing by being with her, He wasn't sure. Things had not worked out as he had planned, and maybe that alone was enough to take the shine of the love he had thought he'd be gaining. At times he cursed himself. He'd allowed Edmure to be weakened in the hopes that he'd be replaced by his sister's son. Cat being regent, a better prospect than Lysa doing the same. Though the more he thought about it, the less he was believing it so. Lysa was pliant, and while so far Cat was too, he worried as more and more of the truth came out she'd not remain so. He stood up and looked out the window. The small town below them would soon give up their whereabouts. The Riverlands were no longer safe ground for them to hide in. It was supposed to be so different. Hoster dead, Edmure pushed aside. Cat regent, and Bran as lord. Ned Stark would have been next to fall, and then Cat's oldest would bring them the north. His moves in the Vale would soon bring that to him too. Years of work ended by not being able to kill a bastard who was not one, and who had taken everything from him. The next day they rode out of the town, the carriage carrying them both. He'd have loved to be able to go to Maidenpool. It'd be much easier to sail from there. But House Mouden had declared for the dragons once more, and he didn't know if he'd trust them. No, Wickenden and home, and then Bravos. The sooner they were gone from Westeros, the sooner he could return. He'd fallen a few rungs, but the ladder still was there. He just hoped it wasn't burned away before he had a chance to climb it once more. "Relax, Cat. Our retreat is only temporary," he said with a smirk. Sunspear 2098 AC. Arianne. She rode hard, Daemon and her last few trusted guards beside her. Dre having come to her aid and practically saving her life. How he had known was beyond her. She'd spent moons rooting out any she thought were spies, replaced guards that she doubted with ones she trusted implicitly. Yet it had all come crashing down, and were it not for Dre, Daemon, and some others, then she'd be facing her father's rage now. 2 days ago, Daemon rode out with the men, 200 in all ready to meet the 300 they had close to the Water Gardens. The need to move against her father was one that hurt her to make, but one that she knew she must. Dorne itself would fall if her father succeeded. He may think he'd see dragons brought low, but he'd find he was very wrong. Jaxliaris' death would unleash a rage on Dorne not seen since the dragon's wrath. This would be so much worse. Rhaenys was not just a dragon. She was a sister, and a sister who had lost one brother already. For someone to take the other from here, then there would be no limit to what she would do. No length she'd not go to, and the cost to Dorne would be one far too high to pay. No, she needed to save her father from himself, and so she sent Daemon to do what was needed. Waiting was hard, not knowing even more so, and though the Water Gardens was mere hours away, it may as well have been in the north for all it took. The news to reach her. Arianne paced in her room, and then the shouts came. The screams, and as she looked out, she saw that Sunspear itself was under attack. At first, it confused her, and then she realized anew she was in serious trouble. "Guards!" she shouted, and her men came running. "Princess, we must move. There are traitors amongst us," her guard said. "How many?" she asked. "More than us," he said, and she gulped. They moved her through the halls, men falling and fighting, some surrendering. The cowards, she thought, as one of her guards left her side to block men from coming at her. Quickly she ran, her dress pulled up and showing even more leg than it did normally. She heard arrows, crossbow bolts. Men beside her fell, and she was still too far away from an escape. By the time she got to the courtyard, it was clear she was done for. They'd be taken. She'd be taken, and she had no way out. The sound of horses startled her, and she looked to see men ride in. Arrows flew and lances hit, and leading from the front, swinging a sword, was Dre. The men wore Dalt colors, Sarandre's personal guard, and Arianne felt herself smile. Perhaps the princess would like a horse. Dre said as he offered her a beautiful chestnut sand steed. "Thank you, kind sir," she said, climbing up, her dress flying, and she for once was glad she'd worn small clothes today of all days. They rode fast from the courtyard and through the Shadow City, out into the open desert, and despite what had happened, Arianne felt herself enjoying the feel of her mount. They soon saw men riding towards them in the distance. Dre had his archers make ready, but it was her colors she saw, and Daemon leading no more than a dozen men their way. "It's Daemon. Lower your weapons," she said. "Princess, can we be sure?" Dre asked. "It's Daemon, Dre. If he's turned on me, I've already lost," she said, and Dre nodded. Daemon was bloodied, but thankfully not seriously so. His men looking he worst for wear, too. He quickly explained what had happened. The 300 men turned on them as they rode. Her father had somehow gotten to them, enough to bring them to his side. Arianne wondered where they were, and when Daemon said they were coming behind them, she felt the panic rise. Where? Who? She asked, seeking some plan or place to think. The desert, princess. The desert, then Lemonwood. And on to Hellhole. We need to get word to Oberyn, and no one can do so better than Elaria, Daemon said. Grey, nodding his agreement. Tyrion and Jaxley's too. It'll take a dragon now to bring my father to heel. Now. So they had ridden, and they had lost them. Or at least, that's what they out. When they turned back for Lemonwood, just how wrong they were. For almost a day they'd been chased. Arianne believing they'd lose them in the sands, and for the briefest moment, it seemed they had, and then she saw the others and realized they were fucked. She looked back and saw the ones behind her, looked ahead, and saw those in front. They were outnumbered 4-1 at least, neither facing those ahead or behind, giving them the edge. She looked to Daemon, to Dray, to the two of her guard who'd survived, and she couldn't bear to see them fall. So she pulled up her horse and bid them do likewise. It's over, I thank you both, she said softly. Princess, we could, Daemon said, and she shook her head. I'll not see you fall, you deserve better. All of you do. The guard in front of her arrived first, and she saw Array leading them, his axe in his hand and relief on his face. She knew the Norvosi cared for her, he always had. She had been his little princess when she was growing up. Yet it would make no difference here. Here he was acting for her father, and so nothing she could say or do would change his mind. If you step down, I'll grant you your lives. Aro said to Daemon, Dray and their men, we step down, Yarrow, though on this, you're on the wrong side, she said, looking at him. I am on the side I'm always on, princess, my princess. Perhaps that's what the princess means, Ariel. Prince Doran is making a terrible mistake. Daemon said, and she saw the briefest glimmer in Ariel's eyes. You know this to be true, Axe. What he's doing will see Dorne burn, see my father dead, or does he think a dragon will give him mercy? It is for my prince to command, for Hada to obey. Ore said, and she knew there was no reasoning with the man. The others arrived then, and Arianne watched as Daemon and his men, as Dray and his and her guards threw down their weapons. She closed her eyes and wondered what her father would do. What was his plan now? Then she heard it and saw the horses spook. The roar sounding so much louder against the openness of the desert. As rains flew over them, it laid down flames, none close to them but a warning, all the same. And then the dragon landed. The king and his king's guard climbed down and moved a few feet from them. I'll accept your surrender now. Do so, and I'll not seek further punishment. Do not, and each and every one of you shall burn, and when I'm done with you, your homes, your families, everyone you will burn also, the king said. You'd not do so. Not with the princess here, the leader of the second group said. Princess Arianne is unbowed, unbent and unbroken. I believe my cousin would rather die on her feet than live on her knees. The king said, and she smiled as she looked to him. We'll not surrender, for Dorne. A man said, moving, though watching Sir Arthur as he moved, dawned to meet him soon. Put paid to anyone else getting the same idea. The man falling before he was even close to the king. Anyone else? The next one won't face a sword. It'll be a dragon who ends him. The king said, and Rain6 roared loudly to let it be known. His words were true. All of the men threw down their weapons, only Areo refusing to do so. Arianne begging him to comply. Serve. Obey. Protect. Simple vows for a simple man, the king said, and Areo looked at him as if he'd seen a ghost. But who you serve, who you obey, and who you protect are as important as those vows. What know you of my vows? Aru asked, his voice strained. I know the man you swore them to is unworthy of them, was his wife, is his daughter, the king asked, and Ariel looked from the king to her. What are your plans for my prince? Areo asked. Help me, and I'll not take his life. Fight me, and you'll die, and so will he. Arianne gasped at how cold Jaimesiart sounded, saying it. You give me your own vow, you'll not seek his death, Areo asked. I'll not seek his death. I may threaten it, but I'll not seek it, the king said, and Arcio nodded, his axe hitting the ground. Arianne climbed off her horse and made her way to the king, cursing in front of him and calling Daemon and Dray over. Your grace, my men stand ready for your command. Arianne said, Your father is done for, princess. No longer is he the prince of Dorne. That you are kin is the only reason I'll not take his head. That he is kin is the only reason Rain6 won't burn the water gardens to the ground with him inside it. What would you see done with him, your grace? She asked worriedly. Seator tells me that Gaston Grey is where traitors to Dorne are sent, he said to her, shocked. For the realm at large, let it be known that your father was sent there. Sent as a traitor to Dorne and to me. After a few moons, you may find somewhere more suitable for him to end his days, but he must be seen to be taken there, and it must be known he was, the king said, and she nodded. You intend to go to the Water Gardens? I intend you to be taken there as these men's prisoner. Let your father confirm what I already know. Sergier deigns strip the prince's men and dress your own in their armor. Ruzio will return with you, princess. I'll arrive not long after. King said, walking away, Argier looking as he spoke to the dragon, and Rex made her displeasure clear. As bad as the sentence was, it could be so much worse, and Ariane felt comforted by that. At least her father would live. It took them a day and a half to ride to the Water Gardens, her father actually having the gall to smile at her when she was brought to see him. She briefly worried that Irio would give the game away, but knowing her father would live and knowing the consequences of not going along with the king's wishes, the Norvosi played his part as well as could be expected. Did you really think I'd not planned for every outcome, that I wouldn't have known your mind? Her father asked. I thought my father still retained his senses. What are you thinking? You think Dorne won't burn when you pull on a dragon's tail, so? She asked, and he laughed. Dragons are irrelevant. I've taken moves to remove them from the board. Moves to see your crowned queen of the Seven Kingdoms, even if I fall afterward. Moves? You'll learn of them soon enough. For now, I'll see you. The sound of fighting had her father turning his head as his men were taken by hers. Ariane even allowing herself a smile when she saw his surprised look. A larger one when he looked to Ario and realized the man was not coming to his aid. She was surprised by the panic in his eyes when he heard the dragon, the shock when he looked up as Rhaenys flew over them. You would sell me out to a bastard king, he asked. You sold yourself. Be lucky that this king thinks more of family than you do, she said as she looked to see the king and Sir Thor and the giant man walking towards her father. Water Gardens 29-8 AC. Jack Daenerys Targaryen. It fumed, plotted, discarded, and finally settled on what he'd do as he flew to Dornan's Sunspear, the Water Gardens, and finally the desert ending up as his destination. It had taken all he had to calm Rhaenys down when she heard him speaking to Sarder the night before. They'd rested by the Scourge, and Arthur had told him about Gaston Grey and what it meant to the Dornish, suggesting that perhaps would suffice publicly at least. You're not letting him go. I mean it, Jade. I don't care. He cannot live, not after what he's done. And yet I'd not see you hurt your uncle either, Rhae. He's your blood. You're my blood. You are all the blood I have left. Tyrion, Daenerys, Shira, Oberyn and his children, Doran and his. You're not alone, Rhae. You're all I have of Father Jay. You're my brother, my blood. The others are kin. You and you alone are blood. As you are to me, Rosier. Trust me, there are worse punishments than death. If he lives, he can plot, plan. One day, he may come back for you. Even were that not so, he deserves to die, she said angrily. Jax feeling the blood drip from his nose, so strongly did her feelings come across through their bond. Trust me, he'll get everything he deserves, he said, and though she didn't agree with him, she trusted him for now. After speaking to Ariane, he'd waited in the desert, laying against Rhaenys' side as she slept, his sister calmer now than she had been. He could understand her rage, her anger. He felt it too, a part of him wanting to make an example of Doran's death. It had been with Olenna he'd realized it though, realized he could not. What she had done had angered him greatly. Yet he couldn't see her hurt because it would hurt Marguerite, Loras, and the rest of his good family. What Doran had done was so much worse, and with Olenna it was never really something he would do, more he'd let his anger cloud his mind. So he had wondered if he was doing that with Doran also. He began to look at it differently. Politically killing Doran would be an issue, more so than sending him to prison. Then there was Oberyn, Ariane, and the rest of his family to think of, right or wrong that his actions may be, they'd hurt them, and in turn he'd be hurting himself. Now, as he walked towards the man, his course was set, and first things first was to see how much he'd admit to his face. Would he try and lie or deny? Try to sway Ariane to his side, or would he man up and claim what he did was best for Dorne? Jay found himself eager to find out, to show this man for who he truly was, who Atzlier had always known he was. Prince Doran, finally, though I doubt you'd have wished to see me this way. On my knees, ready to give you your wish, I believe would have been your preference, he said as he stood in front of a man who was as far from an uncle to him as could possibly be. I would. I nearly did, Doran said, and Jane laughed. Did you indeed? I believe you've spent too much time playing Syvo Doran. Had you just asked, I'd have given you a game to show you just how far out of your depth you truly were, he said, as Arianne looked to them both. I made the moves the board allowed, Doran spat. I fucking own the board, he said back at him. So do you wish to go first? Tell your daughter the moves you made, and I'll tell you how they were countered, he asked. Doran sat there in silence, not looking at him, only at Arianne. Very well, you sent the Darkstar to kill my wife, Jade said to a stunned look from the prince and princess's face. Oh, you didn't know that Marguerite and I were married. Like I said, you were playing on my board. I'd have known, Doran said. Would you now? Is your network better than mine own? Let's put that to the test, shall we? Litterium Mopatis and the boy claiming to be my brother, he said. And Arianne looked at him as Jay nodded his head. The true king, my true nephew, Doran said. And Jay laughed. Do you know anything about Targaryens, Doran? Truly? About fire? A dragon cannot burn, and I've seen this mummer. His scarred face may be hidden under a mask, but I smelt the burned flesh, so tell me, is he still my brother, your nephew? It matters not, Arianne would be. Queen? So that's what he offered you, a decent prize, I concur, but one your daughter wants nothing to do with. Arianne will be Princess of Dorne, is Princess of Dorne, and will marry my uncle, as both of them wish, and you agreed to. Only because I didn't know that Aegon lives, Doran said, shaking his head. Jay glared at him angrily, and Rhaegar roared. My brother died at the mountain's hands. Trust me, there is no one who wishes it were not so, more than me. This disgrace is an insult to his name, to his mother's name, and to Dorne, yet truthfully you care little about any of that. Your sister named me her son, and still you seek your will and not hers. You are not my nephew, Doran said disdainfully. On that, we can agree. I am Oberyn's, though. Yaxlea had at least one brother who cared for what she wanted. Don't speak about my sister. Your sister who you loved so much, who you only wished happiness for, who you'd have never hurt. Jane said, my father loved my aunt. Arianne said, did he tell her about Ser Garrison? He said, and Doran paled. Father? Arianne asked. Tell her. How do you know? Doran asked, his voice soft. I told you, you're playing on my board. But fine, since you won't, then allow me. Your aunt was in love with Ser Garrison Fowler. Truly and with all of her heart. But duty beats love in some people's eyes. And Aelia did hers. Though it broke her heart, after my brother was born and she could bear no more children after living with Eris and having to face him day after day, my father and Iak came to an arrangement. Eragan would be king and keep his place in line, and if my father found someone, then they'd part. Iakia to live her life with her love, and my father with his. Lies, Doran shouted. Is it tell you, daughter, what you did to Ser Garrison? You poisoned him, took him from her, and even after it, she still sought to see my father happy. Your sister deserved a better brother than you. Father? Read this, Jaden said, handing her the letter Elia had written. He watched as she read it, her tears falling as she did so, and the angry way she looked back at her father showed she believed her aunt's words and not his. I did what needed to be done, Doran said, withering under her stare. Aye, but for who? Not for your sister, and not for Doran. So would you like to know how badly you fucked up? Truly? How far your plans went awry? Jay asked with a smile. What do you mean? Your son will take the black for his part, and your treason as will the treasonous lords you brought to your side. Yarnwood, the others, all of them. Your grace, please, Arianne asked. Your brother planned to imprison your uncle, kill him if need be. Do you think Oberyn would have gone peacefully? He asked. Yariane, and she shook her head. Yet Quentyn planned to move against him all the same. I cannot be merciful when it comes to treason, so he takes the black. Your wife's life hangs in the balance. You think my plans only relied on Quentyn? Doran said with a smirk. Again you forget whose board you're playing on. Your second army has been defeated. Lord Viet is dead. Lord Mandy, Sir Saman, Santagar, and Sir Rayo Aurian are presently in the dungeons of Highgarden. He said to a shocked gasp from Aeon and a bewildered look from Doran. You still have to beat the Golden Company, Doran said, and Jay laughed once more. Do you want to know what lies beneath the bitter steel, Prince Doran? I can tell you because I burned it all away, and beneath it lies only burned flesh and charred bones. Did you really think them a match for a dragon? This isn't Sivas, my prince. This is real life, and here you're no match for me. Here it's my board too. He nodded as Doran was taken away, the guards ready to bring him back to Sunspear and on to Gaston Grey. Turning, he looked to Arianne and saw her upset. She was angry too at him, at her father, maybe even at herself. "I am sorry, princess. Truly, he left me with no choice," he said, and she looked at him, a small, barely perceptible nod of her head. "I thank you for his life, your grace. Despite it all, he's my father still." "Perhaps it's time to reach out to your mother, princess," he said, and she gave him a soft smile. "May I get the chance to plead for my brother, your grace, perhaps when cooler heads prevail? Perhaps, as it is now, I've got a final step to take before the realm is at peace. Do you need anything here?" he asked, and she shook her head. As they walked from the water gardens, he turned to Arthur, seeing the knight look around at the place with a look of sadness on his face. "Sir Arthur, I used to come here as a boy, Oberyn. Leah, Ashara, and I, Doran was older, but I felt he loved his sister. I do not know what happened to him, my king. Ambition can be a boon or a curse. Arthur, trust me, I know." "You should have killed him," Arthur said, surprising him. "He is her father, Oberyn's brother. His life is not mine to take, but the gods are watching," he said, and they were soon on Ranx's back and in the air. They landed a short distance from Ghost Hill. The Sea of Dorne and the Stormlands could wait until the morrow. After eating and ordering Arthur and Walder to rest, telling them both they had a long day ahead of them and Rhaenyra would keep them protected, Jared Dane moved over and lay down beside his sister and closed his eyes. The door he was looking for this time. Far more specific. This door he didn't knock at or wait to be invited in. This one he kicked open, and once inside he made himself at home. Words were wind. You let them flow and let people feel the breeze, and if it was just right, they'd welcome it as if it was summer and not the cold winds of winter. Sometimes, though, it was what was left unsaid that was the most important thing. The words thought and not uttered. He'd said he'd not kill Doran, and he wouldn't. No, Doran would eventually end himself. Until then, he'd suffer through, and Jade would see it done. "Your grace, your nose," Walder said when he woke him the next morning, G.A. looking at the blood that had come from it. "Well, it's just a nosebleed," he said, and though Walder looked at him suspiciously, he said no more. After breaking his fast, they were flying again, to Oberyn, and then onto King's Landing. A mummer's dragon and a fat cheesemonger, the last remaining obstacles. He felt Rhaenys underneath him, his sister eager to see the mummer dead, Jay smiling, knowing she'd get her wish soon enough. Dorne 29-8 AC. Doran. It had all come crashing down around him, and he had no idea why or how. He'd been outplayed, and he couldn't understand it. This boy shouldn't have been able to know so much. Were there spies in his ranks? He doubted it. His moves hadn't been countered until the end, and who would let them move so far? Whatever it was, or however he had been beaten, showed him only one real truth. He'd underestimated the dragon badly. Doran should have asked to meet and got the measure of the boy before he planned his moves. Surely he'd have come to see him if he'd asked, but he hadn't, and had instead relied on other people's impressions. Was that where he'd gone wrong? Perhaps or perhaps not. Either way, it left him where he was. That Arianne had wasted no time organizing the ship didn't surprise him. The king had made his wishes explicitly clear. As he looked at Sunspear fading in the distance, he tried not to reflect that, when he woke up this morning, he had felt on the verge of victory. The men with him, the ship's destination, and his daughter's words in his ear, only proving how large his defeat had proved to be. The boy, though, had made a terrible mistake, one he'd not lived to regret. Don't allow a snake a second bite, and Doran would not be out of the game for long. Knowing who he was playing against now, his moves would soon be tailored to his opponent, and this time he'd leave nothing to chance. "Do you need anything, my prince?" Andre Dult asked. "No, I'll rest for the night, thank you, Sir Andre," he said as the man helped him to bed. The fires raged, Sunspear first, and he looked on as Arianne, Trystane, and Quentyn burned, their flesh falling from their bones, their screams piercing in the night sky. The Shadow City was next, people running, but the flames were faster, the dragon giving no respite. The keeps soon followed. Hellholt, and he looked as Oberyn and his children, as Ella Rhea and her father, all burned, and as they cried out for mercy. Doran tried to move, but the chains kept him from being able to. The dragon's roars, as he flew, only broken by the voice of the man behind him. You did this. Each life that's lost, each keep that's destroyed, you did this. Jaxley Harris said as they flew on. For days he didn't sleep, and the dragon never stopped. Ghost Hill, The Tor, God's Grace, Urinwood, Weil, Skyreach, Blackmont, Starfall, keep after keep, person after person, men, women, children. The dragon was indiscriminate, flame after flame, the stench rising and making him gag, and still the dragon flew. Sandstone, Saltshore, Lemonwood, and finally the Water Gardens itself. Durin looking on as the children swam in the pools, their laughing, smiling faces clear to him from where he was chained down on the dragon's back. Please, no, they're innocent, he shouted as the dragon flew toward the children. You did this. Dracarys? Yacarys said, and the dragon began to let loose her flames once more, children screaming in terror as the smell came to him, yet again. Finally it landed, his chains were removed, and he was dragged from her back, his useless legs not able to gain any purchase to stop him from being thrown into the pit. He felt himself falling and then hit the ground, and the noises soon became clear. Snakes and manticores soon covered his body, and he screamed as he looked up to see Jacaerys smiling down on him. Behold the last living person in Dorne, the last of the Rhonar, the man who cost Dorne everything. Goodbye, my prince. I bid you farewell. Aegon and Visenya stopped too soon. You should have realized I would not. Jack Simras said as he moved away. Doran felt the snakes begin to bite, the manticores begin to sting. He looked up and saw Arianne crying. Why, father, why? He shook his head and bid her away, only to open his eyes and see Oberyn on his knees, holding his youngest babe in his hands. All of them because of you, I lost all of them. Doran screamed when he saw her, his sister looking down at him with a spear in her hand. For my love, Yadia said, as she threw the spear, and he looked to see it lodged deep in his heart. Yadia smiling as his vision faded. Dre found him the next morning, lying half in and half out of the bed. There was no marks or wounds on him, and were it not for the look of sheer terror on his face, he'd not understand what had happened. Something had scared him to death, and Dre didn't wish to think what that was. Instead, he closed the prince's eyes and wrapped him up in his sheets before he left the room, shuddering as he did so.